everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny and I'm starting off my September reading wrap-up today. The first book that I finished in September was Talk Before Sleep by Elizabeth Berg. I purchased this book several years ago now in a library sale, so it's a pretty beat up copy. And this book was published in the 90s, the 1993, I think, 1994. So this follows two characters, Anne and Ruth mainly, and then a few other outside characters. It's the story of Ruth's passing from cancer, but also her intensely deep friendships that she has with her group of female friends. And so we're in the present with Ruth and Anne. Anne is a nurse and is, Ruth is her best friend, and she wants to spend as much time as possible with Ruth before she dies. And then we do have some snippets that go back in time to tell us about their friendship and how their friendship formed and different anecdotes from their friendship. So this book, I kind of had mixed feelings about it for a lot of it. And a lot of that was because of the humor and the kind of dynamic of the relationships. And also just the characters themselves. So the characters were, I would say, not necessarily likable, which is fine. I don't need to have a likable character, hence I kept reading. But some of the actions of the characters, some of the trajectories of what they did felt a little strained at times to me, felt a little bit, there's like some moral ambiguity. I think inevitably in a story like this, you question what you would do in this scenario because you're talking about your best friend. Anne had a husband and a daughter, a young daughter that she was, kind of not abandoning, but she was definitely like leaving the daughter in the care of the husband while she was with her friend, and being with her friend and being there for those last weeks and months of her death were like, just so important to her, and she was so focused on it that she really couldn't function in the rest of her life. And I thought that was a really interesting, portrayal. I think the strength of this book is that, we don't talk about these scenarios very much in our culture, in Western culture. We don't talk about death. We don't talk about what happens when someone's dying. We don't talk about the pain and the grief of letting go of an entire relationship that you've built with someone and what that means. And there's also, another dynamic between the other women in the friendship group. And Ruth, as she's dying, feels this obligation to encourage Anne to kind of connect more with the other women so that she can have friendship once Ruth is gone. There's a period of denial. Everyone is like, no, Ruth's going to recover from this somehow, even though she has cancer spreading through her whole body, she's going to not die. So there's this idea of denial, and then finally this place where they have to come to accept that this is what's going to happen. So there's a lot of interesting themes talked about. Again, the moral ambiguity of Ruth herself, the character, having left her husband because she just was unhappy. The one part of the book that I also found hard was this kind of general sweep statements about marriage and about partnerships. And I think this is also very much a generation that Elizabeth Berg is writing about, which I think is potentially different now for some people. I think some people's relationships are probably still very similar to this, where they just marry someone and realize when they're 20 years into the relationship that they just don't they just aren't actually compatible anymore. And so that realization, but there's like some general statements about, men and the way men are, the way women are, the way marriage is, which I think was, again, true for this character, but just felt a bit too general in how it was conveyed in the text of the novel. And there's a full circle moment in that as well with both Anne and Ruth. And I think the depth of their relationship is really interesting, kept me reading. And also just, again, this topic, I think it's a very important topic because I love books about female friendship. And I also think it's just so important to discuss when those things end and how those things end and how we go on and where we find hope and where we find, how we process pain and how we process the difficult times in our lives. Like all these things, it's great to have a novel discuss those things and give an option, give a path for someone who might be looking for that or who might be contemplating that in our lives. I would say this was about a 3.75 for me. I don't know if I will read any more Elizabeth Berg. The writing was good enough, but I tend not to enjoy the kind of forced humor that can be included. Like I saw what was supposed to be funny in this, and it didn't really make me laugh out loud. I know some people it would. But for me, it didn't. And that wasn't a deal breaker for me, though, because I don't think it was too much. There wasn't too much of it in the novel. So I will see. But I think the subject matter of this one was what drew me to it. And the writing was just fine and good enough. And I don't know if I would seek out another one of her novels based on the writing itself. So, yeah. That was my first finish for September, and I will check in again with you when I have finished another book. Hey y'all, I wanted to share with you my next finish for September, and that is The Rules of Fortune by Danielle Prescod. This is a novel about a family, the Carter family, who are billionaires, and their skeletons in their closet, and the things that they do to become who they are, and the things that they do to protect their fortune, and the people who are trying to take them down, and the things that they have to do to stop those people. Overall, I wasn't a huge fan of this book. I didn't feel like I cared much about what was happening in it. But I did do a full Fresh Reads vlog about this. So if you're interested in learning more, then please head over to the vlog. It'll give you more in-depth thoughts on the story. But yeah, overall, this was not super successful for me. And I will check in again with you when I have finished another book. Hey everyone. So I finished Leavings by Wendell Berry. And this was okay poetry collection for me. I think Wendell Berry is a great writer. And I did like his style and the way he puts words together. I think just some of the subject matter didn't really pull me in as much, but I did want to read you 2 poems from this collection, which were very powerful. I think Wendell Berry is a very political person, also a very spiritual person, so the spiritual part didn't really resonate as much with me, which is strange because I love nature poetry and I love usually nature poetry is my favorite. So it was a little surprising to me that his nature poetry didn't really grab me, but his more political based poetry did. So this one is, it doesn't actually have a title. It's 7, and it's in a section of the book from 2006. So it's just titled 7. And it says, before we kill another child for righteousness' sake to serve some blissful killer's sacred cause, some bloody patriot's anthem and his flag, let us leave forever our ancestral lands, our holy books, our God thoughtified to the mean of our smallest selves. Let us go to the graveyard and lie down forever among the speechless stones. So that one I thought was very, very powerful. And then near the end, this is 12, and it starts with a small quote from Hosea 4:6. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And then the poem reads, we forget the land we stand on and live from. We set ourselves free in an economy founded on nothing, on greed verified by fantasy on which we entirely depend. We depend on fire that consumes the world without lighting it. To this dark blaze driving the inert metal of our most high desire, we offer our land as fuel, thus offering ourselves at last to be burned. This is our riddle, to which the answer is a life that none of us has lived. So I thought that one was also really powerful. So I'm not sure if I'll read more Wendell Berry. I'll see. I had this on my library list for a really long time because, there are a lot of people that really love his work. I think this gave me a good overview of his work, but I'm not sure his style really is, or his, I'm just not sure it's completely for me, even though I can definitely appreciate his writing and his perspective. So that is Leavings, Poems by Wendell Berry, and I will check in again with you when I finish another book. Hey everyone. So yesterday I finished The Earth Spinner by Anuradha Roy, and I wanted to wrap it up for you. So this I listened to on audio, and I really liked the narrator. I thought she had a lovely voice. And this novel is set in India and in England. It starts off in England with Sarah, our young protagonist, coming to college, and she has won a scholarship to get to this school. And then we are with her for, several chapters. I guess it's hard to tell when you're listening to it on audio. You can't tell exactly how far in you've gotten. I guess I didn't check. And then we go back to India, and we start off learning about Sarah's family, her parents, her sister, and also another character whose name has totally gone out of my head, who is of a lower caste. So he is a potter, and he also drives an auto rickshaw, and he would pick up Sarah and her sister and take them to school, and he would also give Sarah pottery lessons. So there's a lot of great description in this book about pottery, like throwing pots and the pottery wheel and clay, and so I really enjoyed that part a lot. And this character, it's going to bother me that I don't remember his name. I'm going to look it up. Okay, so the potter's name is Ilango, and Ilango is a single man. He lives with his sister and his brother, and he throws his pottery, and then he drives his rickshaw. And one night he has a dream about a horse, like a beautifully described dream about a clay horse underneath the water, breathing fire, or with a mane of fire, I think. And after that, he ends up encountering this dog and finding this dog on the side of the road that seems to have been abandoned, and he feels compelled to pick up this dog. And of course, we're talking about India, where there are a lot of stray dogs roaming the streets, and so something about this dog is really special to him. So Ilango also falls for a woman who is Muslim, and he is Hindu. So this presents some issues in terms of who, their future together, because religions do not usually intermarry, and when they do, it's kind of an issue, and it's hard and all that. So that's one conflict that happens in the story. And there's a lot of things about the part of the story told in India that very charming. There's a lot of characters living in their part of the city. The dog was actually not abandoned, but got lost during a car accident, and the one woman who had lost the dog is always looking for the dog. So the dog kind of pulls you through the story because everybody loves the dog, and the dog becomes kind of a central figure in the overall story. And so we stay in the India. So we start off in the England part of the story, and then we go to the India part of the story, and we're there for like the whole middle part of the book, and then we go back to England. So I thought that the structure of that was a little bit distracting. I don't know if that's because I was like listening to it, but I just found that I would have preferred alternating between England and India more often, because what happened was you spent this very brief time in England, and everything was set up to kind of tell you about the story in England, and some of Sarah's classmates and things like that. And then we totally didn't go back there for a really long time, and we were in the India part of the story. There is some crossover later, where Alongo is in England and Sarah encounters him. And the political parts of the story, the religious conflict parts of the story, kind of culminated in this kind of very shocking scene, actually, which I found very powerful and very upsetting. And I really enjoyed, I think, Alongo's part of the story the most, and probably would have liked to have him be, in some ways, I think if he was the main character, I would have liked the story even more. I did like the story, and I think it was Anuradha Roy's writing is very good, and I would definitely read more of her work. I just think, for me, the structure of the story, like the way we moved between the two stories, between the two timelines, didn't quite work for me. It was a little bit too, there was just too much space in between, and I needed to kind of bounce back and forth a little bit more to really care more about Sarah's part of the story, even though she's very present in the India part too, but it's just she's young. She's a young girl in that part, so you're remembering her memories through the young girl perspective. So it was an interesting choice for the author to do that. I think maybe she wanted more space so that we weren't completely absorbed by Alongo's story, so that we could see it from more of a third party perspective, rather than a first person perspective. But anyway, it was a very interesting novel, and I will definitely read more of her work, and I will check in again with you when I have finished another book. Hi all. So last night I finished The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Marianne Shaffer and Annie Barrows, and this was such a delight. I really enjoyed reading this book. It's epistolary, told through letters, and I just thought that everything about it was just so life-affirming and fun, and I loved the characters. We are following Juliet, who is our main, it is Juliet, right? Yes, Juliet Ashton. She receives a letter from someone she doesn't know who lives on the Isle of Guernsey in the Channel Islands. And he had found her address in a book that he was reading. And he loves this author, and he asks her if she knows of any way that he could get his hands on more of his of this author's work. And so this starts a kind of pen pal relationship between the two of them. And Juliet is a writer who's looking for a subject. And what she ends up finding is all about Guernsey during the German occupation in World War II. If you didn't know, Germany occupied the Channel Islands, which are between France and England, during the war. And a lot of the people on the island suffered quite a bit from this occupation, obviously. And so we learn about that. We learn about these eccentric and lovely characters who live on the island. And Juliet also corresponds with a very good friend and her editor, who's a very good friend. And you just end up loving all these characters so much. There is also a lot of sad and horrible things that are shared in this story, as is the case with a World War II story. But I just thought that the way the author shared them and the way she wrote it so that, you know, you had these terrible things happening that were deeply affecting people and had deeply affected people, but then also there were all these life-affirming things. And I'm not usually one for humor in books, but I found the humor in here to be quite charming, and I did laugh out loud several times of different things that happened. So this is one of those books that I feel deserves the hype that it got. I just think, you know, it's a lovely story. I did think it ended a bit too abruptly for me, and that is because it kind of references Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen a couple times, and the underlying love story in this book definitely echoes a Jane Austen story in that way. So I wasn't super happy with that because I'm not someone that likes the story to end at the beginning of a relationship. But other than that, I really enjoyed the story, the characters. They're very richly drawn. And, you know, there was one criticism in one of the reviews I read that, you know, there isn't a lot of differentiation between the character voices and the letters. And I would agree with that as a criticism. I think there is some differentiation, but not quite a lot. But I think in some ways that actually made the story better, because I think if you tried too hard to make all the characters have a different narrative voice, it would become too choppy. It would become too hard to follow the thread through the story. And you would not get as attached to some of the characters as the others, because you would prefer one narrative voice over another. So I think that was a stylistic choice potentially that the author made, which was to not make every single character have a very different tone and way of sharing their stories. And I think that actually worked in the novel's favor personally. But again, I think, you know, I don't think you should go into this book with a lot of heavy literary criticism. I don't think that's the type of book this is. This is historical fiction. This is meant to be a story that is uplifting and beautiful and affecting, but not a story that is, you know, trying to change the world or trying to take, you know, the epistolary form and make it into some sort of elevated delivery. It's just, it is what it is. Just take it for what it is and enjoy it, because I certainly did. So that is the Guernsey Literary the problem with it is the title, because it's not in one that rolls off the tongue, but the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. And I did thoroughly enjoy this one. And I will check in again with you when I have finished another book. Hey y'all. So I finished Georgia O'Keeffe by Lisa Mintz Messenger. This was my Patreon book club read for the months of July, August, and September. And this is, I think, a good book to read if you're looking for a quick overview of Georgia O'Keeffe's work. Her life and her like personal impressions, I would say, are not focused on as much in this book. It's more about the kind of evolution of her work over time. So it gives you a good overview. It's not super long. It's not super complex, I would say, in the language if you feel intimidated by artsy talk. But it also talks about, the artists around her that influenced her and, the basics of her life as she progressed. I mean, she lived to 98 years old, so she had a very long life with a lot of things that happened. She is one of the most famous American artists to ever live, and her artwork and her persona were so powerful in terms of the mythos around her. And this book doesn't really go into that. I think there's probably other books that go into that better than this one did. But like I said, if you're looking for a brief overview of the kind of evolution of her work and where her work sits maybe in the art history canon, then I think this one would be good for that. But if you wanted something more in depth about her life and her feelings and her thoughts and her deeper kind of things, then I would say seek out one of the other longer biographies that probably cover that more in depth. And I will check in with you when I have finished another book. Hey everybody. So I finished my last book of September, and that was Rebel Girl by Kathleen Hanna, My Life as a Feminist Punk. And so Kathleen Hanna was the front woman for several bands, Bikini Kill, The Tigre, and then she had a solo project called The Julie Ruin. She also founded a movement called Riot Girl. And all of this was born out of her desire to be a feminist, to live feminist values and punk values. And she's the first to kind of admit that that was never perfect and that, she never did it perfectly. She had a lot of trauma in her life. And she brushed elbows with a lot of, she's quite a famous musician herself, but she brushed elbows with people like Kurt Cobain from Nirvana. She actually, he got the idea for Smells Like Teen Spirit from her. And she also married one of the Beastie Boys, Adam Horowitz. It was really interesting to read about her life, to read about the progression of her musical career. It was a pretty tough slog. She wasn't like living in luxury or experiencing, a lot of pampering from the music industry, because for a lot of it she was in the indie scene, and so it was a lot of self-promoting, taking care of yourself on tour. You don't get a lot of the perks that you see a lot of the very big stars getting. And she also suffers from Lyme disease, which she probably contracted as a kid, and it made her very, very sick at different points in her life. There is a lot of triggering things in this book for some people, so triggers for sexual assault and parental abuse and parental induced trauma. She underwent a lot of difficult periods in her life and had trouble connecting with people and being kind to herself because of a lot of the trauma that she experienced in her life. And so it's not really an easy book to read. There's a lot of hard moments. And then, not being someone super familiar with the punk scene myself, she, talks about a lot of bands and a lot of musicians that I'm not really super familiar with. But I think, similarly to Nina Cherry's memoir, that's kind of par for the course when you're not like completely involved in in a certain genre of music's like backstory. You don't know like every single like musician along the way, so that's okay for me. I don't need to know all those names and know all those bands, and be familiar with the music. I did listen to some of the different songs from Bikini Kill that she mentions in here. She does write out some lyrics in some different parts when the song lyrics kind of speak to the chapter. And her chapters are very short. It's kind of, there is a narrative connector, like it is going chronologically. She does, go backwards into some childhood memories when they relate to the situation she's dealing with in each chapter, but the chapters are usually very short, so just a few pages per chapter. And she's not, she didn't gloss over like becoming a mom or different things like that, but she doesn't go into them in depth either. It really is mostly about her music and art career. She went to art school. She made a lot of performance art. She did a lot of spontaneous, in the moment pieces, and took her art very seriously and faced a lot of sexism and a lot of criticism. Like for instance, Courtney Love hated her because she perceived Kathleen Hanna's relationship with Kurt Cobain in a certain way, and like Courtney Love actually punched her in the face. So things like that that are harsh, and she had a lot of harsh things she had to deal with. But overall I really enjoyed reading this, and I'm glad I read it. And that wraps up my reading for this month, and I hope you had a great reading month, and I will be back again soon with another video. Thanks so much for watching.